our continent, the South American continent, to better understand the context in which took place the Cuban Revolution. Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba suffers economical and military destabilization and aggression, especially from the United States and the European Union. You can see this in the news every day. So we, as ALBA Malta North Africa, support this project of integration and independence and sovereignty. This year, 2019, marks a significant date in Cuba's political calendar because it is the sixth anniversary of the Cuban Revolution. So while we have chosen Cuba, not only because it's also part of the ALBA, the Bolivarian Alliance, but it is also because, unlike other revolutions that have been celebrated by Western media as a liberation, an example of, for the world in the grip of dictators, the Cuban Revolution has not received the same honors. With the death of Commander Fidel Castro Ruiz on 2016, there was an unbelievable flood of articles, not only against the person of Comandante Fidel Castro, but also against the Cuban Revolution. We have observed that the Spanish newspaper El País, that you know, for example, wrote in 1 month more than 140 articles. We have also noticed that in Malta there has been no debate on this subject, and we found it wise to overcome this deficiency. In our view, we consider, above all, that it's very important to always contextualize. Nothing comes from nothing. It is very important to understand that this nation can only be analyzed if we take into account the history of South America and its struggle for national independence and social emancipation against Spanish, Portuguese colonialism, French, Dutch, and also United States hegemony. So we have distinguished 3 important steps before the Cuban Revolution. So the first step, that also you are going to see this in the diaporama. So the first step, it is the struggle for national independence against the Spanish colonization, which continued throughout the 19th century with the Libertadores, the liberators, I don't know in English, like Simón Bolívar, you have it here, Artigas, San Martín, and of course the Cuban national hero and father of the Cuban independence, José Martí. You will have him there. So the second important step, it is the Haitian Revolution with the great Toussaint Louverture in 1804, which was the first revolution to declare the total equality in law of all men, white and black, and to make capitulate the French slavery regime. The third step, it is the Mexican Revolution in 1910, that was the first modern revolution of the 20th century, before the Bolshevik Revolution, and marked the first major social uprising in South America, where much of the land was distributed to the peasants, led by Emiliano Zapata and Pancho Villa, that you have here. So, however, this independence and revolution, although they mark an important progress in the process of liberation of the working class, finally ended up favoring the Anglo-Saxon interest to implement the free trade market and the local bourgeoisie. They could not achieve the goal of economic independence, unity, and social justice of the working people. To deepen this point, I invite you all to read Eduardo Galeano's book that you have certainly. It was written in the 70s, and it has become today a classic studied even in the American universities, and was also the book that the Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez offered to President Obama, but we do not think that Obama has read it. So this book shows how during more than 500 years our continent has been looted, how worked the mechanism of dispossession, and how the resistance against it was organized. Okay? So to return to the history of pre-revolutionary Cuba, it is also the history of colonization and slavery, military occupation and submission to American interests. The history of Cuba also starts with the invasion of Spanish conquistadores in 1492 and begins with a huge chaos and genocide of the native Amerindian that were decimated. The insertion of the island into the capitalist world system begins with destruction and looting. The Spaniards will create in Cuba a new social organization totally connected to the world market with an oligarchy of big landowners who rule by latifundium, and monopolize the wealth, land, mining, agriculture like nickel, manganese, tobacco, and sugarcane. So after the independence of Spanish colonialism in 1898, Cuba was the latest of the Spanish colony to be independent, Cuba will become the property of the American corporation and a neo-colonial republic based on mono-exporting economy of sugarcane dominated by an extreme poverty and social inequality. Okay? This was formalized by the American Economic Treaty in 1902 and the Platt Amendment, which legalized American interventionism and the control of Guantanamo Bay with a life lease for more than 60 years. It was only in 1959, with the political takeover by the movement of July 26 and held by Comandante Castro, Che Guevara, Raúl Castro, Cienfuegos, and many others, largely supported by peasants, workers, students, that Cuba has been able to recover its national sovereignty and put an end to the economic dependence with the United States, and will seek to create a more egalitarian society. So today, the figures of the most important international institutions, such as World Bank, UNESCO, UNICEF, even the European Union, recognize the excellence of the Cuban social system, despite the economic war, terrorism, and a blockade that is proved to be the longest in human history. We believe that younger generations around the world should recognize this part of South American history as part of the universal history, the unique history of democracy and socialism. Although Cuba is portrayed by mainstream media as a non-free country with an archaic political and economic system, a huge gap separates propaganda and clichés from the complex reality of the island. What is the current situation of Cuba today? We hope with this meeting that to increase the links between Maltese and Cuban workers through their trade unions, to focus political pressure on Maltese government against the American blockade, to raise awareness of Cuba's social achievement in health and education and sustainability, and to publicize Cuba's international solidarity and its support to poor countries.
Is Cuba a democracy or a dictatorship? If I were to ask you this question, some would surely say a dictatorship. I'm sure. This, however, is the wrong answer. The trouble is that is how US-controlled Western media describe Cuba. This is very far from the truth. In fact, Cuba has a more democratic system than ours here in Malta. Democracy in Cuba is a participatory democracy, where political power is in the hands of the people, and not in the hands of political parties. There are about 133,000 grassroots organizations in which the population participates. Each organization has its own assembly, and each assembly elects a delegate to represent them in the National Assembly, with a mandate that the delegate will speak and support what was decided in the Assembly. Failing to do so, he will be recalled back and replaced. At present, the new constitution is being discussed at these grassroots assemblies. When agreements are reached in the national assemblies, this will again go back to the people, who will accept or reject in a referendum. This is a far cry from what is happening here in Malta with regards to a new constitution that is being discussed now. This in itself explains why there are no need of other parties in Cuba than the Party of the Revolution, which is the Communist Party of Cuba. How could there be a dictatorship in Cuba when after the revolution illiteracy was completely eradicated? Over 10 million persons were taught how to read and write, where the health system is the best and advanced, even US citizens go there for cure, where during the tenure as president of Cuba, Fidel Castro, you could have met him on the streets mingling with the people. One must understand, to achieve this popular democracy, one must completely do away with class society. Unless the bourgeoisie is completely silenced, there can never be an egalitarian society. If you want this privileges and
Cuba and Florida. But having said that, you know, you read all kinds of situations about human rights, the Human Rights Index, etc. The fact of the matter, this is a country which punched above its weight. I wish we Maltese can learn something from that, in relative terms. It punched above its weight in everything. First of all, it provides lessons to the United States itself. You don't find people in Cuba, and I don't think this has been questioned, living out in the streets. The only Cuban children you find living in the institution are in Miami, or in Tampa, or in Orlando. But you're not going to find them in Cuba. You have one doctor per 130 persons in Cuba, data statistics. You have an attack, and for me this is a very important thing, and I think very few people give Cuba credit for this, an attack on the culture of obsolescence, which is the culture which is ingrained in capitalist thinking. When you look at the cars, 1950 cars, and the great part of science is not just medicine, it's the mechanics who get these cars working. I've heard this from people over there now. Huh? You know, like in a very, you know, in a very efficient way, that militates against the whole idea of obsolescence, get rid of things. And then that, of course, obsolescence is part of the problem we have with planet Earth. And this is where Cuba scores highly, because according to the WWF, what's that, the World
Wildlife
Fund,
Yes.
Cuba is the only country in the world with sustainable development. You would think with old cars you have a lot of pollution. It is the only country in the world with sustainable development. So there are many lessons we can learn from Cuba. We can learn lessons, for example, okay, participatory democracy, one-party states. There are many arguments about that. Well, when I always questioned, why a one-party state after every revolution, except in Nicaragua, where the Sandinistas did test themselves with the electorate and got elected with a landslide after the revolution of 1979, which was considered by many observers as one of the best elections in Latin America. Even Jimmy Carter recently said that. And yet, of course, America doesn't recognize this. I mean, all you have to do is mention Nicaragua to Reagan, and he sees red, or he saw red at the time, and shoots.
But the Sandinistas were defeated afterwards.
Let me finish. That's how I'll tell you. The Sandinistas sold out. Not only were they defeated, they were defeated in 1919 because of the Contra War. People wanted, you know, like, so they voted for, what's her name, Violeta, Dona Violeta. But then it got worse, because the Sandinistas, to get into power, made a pact with the liberals. And now this is one area which I studied a lot in my own work on adult education. And I had connections with Nicaragua, many Canadians who worked there, because, you know, Nicaragua in the 70s was like the civil war in Spain in the 30s, right? Everybody has to go to Nicaragua. I did, but I was a student there, and you know, it was all about Nicaragua at the time. They sold out, never mind the people who died. You know, when you sell out, there are the ghosts of those people who are your friends who were killed. And that's what probably drives that old generation forward. You know, like, you continue the fight because I have died. And this is important, what maybe young people don't understand. So, yeah, well, so you have, and then you have the whole idea. And I know because I have a book series, and there's a fantastic book done by by some of my colleagues with Cuban right editors on the capacity to share with no strings attached. This whole idea of solidarity on an international scale, based on a very, very basic human transaction, bartering. I give you doctors, you give me oil at a lower price. Venezuela. And it goes on, education. Now, I come from